Welcome back to the Politics with Paul podcast, your home for nonpartisan discussion of political science and civics. I am your host, Paul Rader. It's another guest episode today, and for such episodes, I always add a disclaimer that I do not take a stance for or against a guest's political views or groups they support, but as always, our topics are things that people across the political spectrum can take away from. Civic engagement is a difficult, taxing endeavor. In many cases, it takes a lot of time, energy, and money to do well. And even then, there are still a lot of people who don't engage with elections and politics in general, whether it's for a lack of information, feeling civic engagement is too onerous, or some other reason. But could an app be the game-changing solution to revitalizing civic engagement in America? Enter Sway, a group voting service that helps anyone organize on a wide array of political topics and elections. And here to talk about Sway and its potential impacts on civic engagement is the CEO and a co-founder of Sway, Claire Shoreall. Claire is an accelerator mentor and the former principal of NEO, a mentorship community, startup accelerator, and venture capital fund. And before then, she was the CEO and a co-founder of Top Knot, a personal development platform for women. Now, let's get more into this app, Sway, and how it could impact and improve civic engagement in America. Please welcome Claire Shoreall. Claire, thanks for coming on. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. So I like to start off interviews by getting into the beginnings, the genesis of why my guests do what they do, their involvement with this topic that we talk about. So before your work with Sway, what got you involved in the field of civic engagement and why?
Yeah, I think civic engagement actually started for me at birth. I was recently going through stuff at my parents' house, and apparently the governor of Pennsylvania wrote me a welcome to life letter at the back. Yeah,
No
this
kidding.
was Dick Thornburg back in the day. I think my grandmother was the interior decorator on the governor's mansion, which is why I got that. But
Oh, wow.
we've been in and around politics my whole life. I think that is the nature of growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's just a very purple place, and politics is part of the dialogue. But I was fortunate when I was 18, I got to vote in my first presidential election. So that was back in 2004. So I was a super volunteer on the Kerry campaign. And then again in 2008, I was a senior in college, and that was during the Obama first election. So, we were all about hope and change. And it's just always been an interest. I watch all 5 Sunday shows every week. I think I watched all 5 Sunday shows as like a 5-year-old. So there just hasn't been a point in my life where politics hasn't been front and center.
Nice. Okay. I can't quite say it was from birth for me, but I do, remember little bits and pieces here and there. I remember back in the 2000 election. So I'm in Florida, and 2000 election obviously is a bit notorious
Yes.
down here. But I do vaguely remember going with my parents to the poll. So this 2000 election, so I was 7 at the time. And I just remember going with my parents to a polling place one time. That's one of the earliest ones. And then actually just brought up the 2004 election. I do remember a little bit of back in, that was 4th grade when, no, I would have just started 5th grade at the time. But it was a little bit about obviously talking about how elections worked. And
Yeah, for sure. I remember for me, that was the Dole Clinton race.
okay.
Yeah. So I think in Pittsburgh, a lot of people say they grow up around these things, but in Pittsburgh, because candidates are always there and we're flooded with television commercials, like it is just part of the zeitgeist often, but clearly every 4 years. And so it is hard to avoid. And for me, that was not a problem at all. But, Pittsburgh and just being in an incredibly purple area, and my family represents things across the aisle as well. It just always was a conversation that you couldn't avoid from childhood.
Neat. Yeah. Now, I can't quite say we couldn't avoid it. I mean, sometimes back in middle school, you have conversations, and whatever our parents told us, we parroted off. We didn't really know,
Right.
anything or how to critically evaluate things. But and it's a great point that you brought up about the being able to engage with multiple parts of the political spectrum, the purple area you found? Because I think obviously this app you're talking about is something that really anybody of any political persuasion could use. So what led you to co-found Sway, and how would you describe Sway? I know I talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but obviously you want to hear it in your own words. So how would you describe Sway? How'd you get into it, and what does it seek to do?
Yeah. So, big picture, we're calling Sway the internet platform for group voting. And group voting is an old idea that we are just trying to bring online. But let me step back for a second. The idea for Sway is actually not mine. It is my co-founder, Ali Partovi's. And he's had the idea now for 6 years, and we have been close. We've been working together for over 12. And so, Ali brought me this idea, back in 2020. We need a different power structure. Actually, I think a lot of his motivation was, frankly, for him, disgust with the two-party system. And we were just talking about it sort of at a high level, what would get unlocked if we could make these voting groups online. But I was doing other things. I was working on my own company, and I think things came to a head, particularly in the summer of 2024. Um, Ali really, I think, had the moment watching the watching the debate between Biden and Trump. Actually, as a fun fact, I never actually saw that debate because I was at a track meet. And so, and then afterwards, I saw all of the coverage. So I never actually sat down to watch that whole thing. But yeah, he was like, now is the time to really question why we have these two parties. And I was open to having that conversation, and this is my own politics and not Sway's. I was feeling like things were existential. And so instead of working on Sway at that moment, I decided to go back to home to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and to work as a field organizer, which is the bottom of the rung of a campaign ladder, which, I think at the time it confused Ali. He was like, why are you taking this minimum wage job and going and working on this campaign? But for me, it felt like, one, duty, and two, I just wanted to be able to look back and say that I had done something. Now, what we both didn't know at the time was that this was going to be the best user research project I could have ever done, because I will talk to anyone, and I was talking to tens of thousands of voters, legitimately. Like, I was out there, I knocked a couple thousand doors, but unlocked over 90,000 door knocks. I got to speak ahead of the candidate on the night before the election to a sea of thousands of people. And so, and then not to mention just the everyday conversations and all that call time. And I came back in November, and not just because obviously I felt like some of my campaign efforts were futile, but also just being so up close and personal with voters and politics and the things that really weren't working made me hear Ali's pitch on Sway in an entirely different way. So back to this idea of voting groups. Voting groups exist. They are essentially things like unions or special interest groups. I like to highlight the NRA because it's such an example that I think a lot of people know and understand. So the NRA is, roughly 4 million people in membership, but where do they get their actual power? It's because they send out these voter guides and report cards, and their people reliably show up to vote, even in primaries. And so that means that they functionally write the gun laws in this country because they are an undeniable voter bloc. Cool. Like, strategy works. Organization matters. A group of ordinary citizens who are organized wield way more power than just individuals who are all voting based off of vibes. So what we have done is created a platform where people who want to organize their fellow citizens, either on one issue or on an ideology across the board, can say, hey, vote with me, and in exchange, I will send you ballot guidance. Now, when you vote with me, I'm going to ask you to do one thing, which is to verify that you are a registered voter. And on Sway, what that unlocks is we can look at these voting groups and know exactly how many people within a voting group can vote on any given seat up and down the ballot. So you can imagine instead of just a parent at the PTA who really cares about education, right? They could now rally fellow parents, get them into a voting group, and then go to the school board and not just represent themselves, but represent themselves plus the 70 parents who are going to vote for your seat, school board member number 2 in this upcoming election. That gives them real leverage that right now is otherwise hard to see. And so it's a simple concept. It's a proven concept. We are just trying to make it available to the masses.
Nice. That's a great point that you highlight. It is nice to have the whole rah-rah getting people invested in politics, but if you don't have a practical way to get them to actually organize, that is one of the biggest things in politics, is having people be organized, then you're really going to win few, if any, elections. And a lot of people think about the money too, and obviously money is great to have. You do need some level of money, but even if you have a lot of money, if you're disorganized, there's not a whole lot that you're going to be able to do. And the NRA obviously is a perfect example of that. Ones like the AARP, another key example. But I thought that was really cool that you have the whole. I mean, obviously, it's nice to have a whole bunch of people congregate on Sway, but if they're not actually registered to vote, there's not really a whole lot that they can do to help you, obviously. And it just kind of reminded me also, I used to work at Ballotpedia, and they have a sample ballot tool that you can not sign up for. If you go on their website and you just put your address, it'll tell you all the elections that are coming up for you in the on the upcoming election, which is really cool. So it sounds similar to what you've got going on with Sway.
We love Ballotpedia over here at Sway, and just signed a partnership. So now on candidate pages, our endorsers will show up as a part of the candidate information. So, Ballotpedia is great, and we are very excited to be in a partnership with them.
Oh, that's awesome. Glad to hear it. Yeah, it's been a little over 2 years now since I've left, but I obviously always will vouch for them, and a lot of the skills I learned from there about sifting through bias and such, I still take with me in this work I do. But speaking of Sway, obviously a little bit more on the general being able to message directly with other like-minded voters, because there are some other messaging platforms that campaigns and political operations have used for what they do. Maybe it's Discord, which is expanded beyond video gaming, or something like a GroupMe or WhatsApp.
Right.
Things like that. So if somebody's looking at what platform to use for their campaigns and activism, what makes Sway a better option for them compared to other messaging platforms? If they say, oh, well, why don't I just use this app instead? What is it that Sway does that these other apps don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think at the core of it, there is consent and trust. Okay, so obviously, if you're getting on a Discord or you're joining the WhatsApp group, you've given consent because you've opted into that space. And I will say, in many ways, Sway's not trying to replace the group chat. But on Sway, people can join a voting group, and the default state for them in joining is anonymity. So you can imagine that they may have some political beliefs that they want to put weight behind that might be socially unpopular. Awesome, cool. We make that very easy. We also make it easy for you to just be anonymous because you don't want to be out there about it. So once you join a voting group, you can either default be anonymous, or you can say, I want to be a public face of this movement, and list yourself as part of it. That's actually, interestingly, the way that most people show up in groups, but totally up to you. Now, what sort of communications would you receive on Sway? Let's do it from the supporter perspective, or someone who's just joining a group. Your voting group leader can send you updates on events or actions, but it is metered, because this isn't supposed to be like the point of dialogue. This is actually just the point of exchange of information. So we are thoughtful about how frequently people are able to update you. And then the other thing that's different than, I would say, just like a mass broadcast platform, is that the ballot guidance you get is specific to you and the jurisdiction that you can vote in. So even I live in San Francisco. we have very complicated ballots here because we have direct democracy and referenda up the wazoo. So there are ballot guides all over the city, right? And you pick and choose, but there are things that are on there that I cannot vote on because of where I live. On Sway, you receive this personalized ballot guide. And then the really cool thing is, because it's the internet and not just paper, depending on who voting groups are in network with, so your voting group leader following other like-minded folks, it is the case that you might receive voter guidance from top to bottom from, say, second degree connections of the people that you are following directly. Why does that matter? Well, like, if, let's say, some celebrity, I'll take real ones, Taylor Swift or Joe Rogan come on and they start seeding themselves by following a couple other people that they think are like-minded folks. And those people are finding other people. You might be in South Carolina, you might be in rural Texas, you might be, and receive ballot guidance for your local race based off of a second or third degree connection. Now, these are all attributed as such, so you are able to audit the pathway and see exactly where these recommendations are coming from. But that's really different than the group chat because, these aren't like AI generated. These are human to human trusted relationships that are passing things down that are auditable. So you can see the path by which you got all those recommendations. But ultimately, we want to put a layer of connectivity above what just happens in these sort of like one-to-many broadcast environments.
Neat. I do like the concept of I'm almost always for, if more transparency, the better, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. Obviously, these algorithms that we have that mostly more designed to manipulate us than to actually inform us, they can be very opaque and obscure, and how are people coming up with this? Whereas you're talking about here, it's not really an algorithm. It's more based on human interactions, and you have a lot more leeway as to which one of those you accept. So I think that's a really cool distinction there. And obviously, of course, with discords and everything like that, you don't quite get that shall I say control over which of those as much control over which of those recommendations are coming towards you. So that's a really fascinating distinction there, and definitely something to think about more for any of you who are looking as to which messaging platforms you want to use. But speaking of who is going to actually use Sway, who exactly can and should use Sway? And I know we touched on it a little bit, but are there any particular stipulations on what groups or individuals can use this app, or any limits on what kind of issues that a Sway group can focus on?
Yeah. So as far as leaders are concerned, anyone can be a leader on Sway. You are talking to me at a point where we are complete in product development, but still early. So anyone can go on to sway.co right now and make their own voting group, and it works. But there's always going to be new features coming. And one of the decisions that we are in the process of making is whether or not like unverified leaders can show up in search results. What this, the crux of this means, anyone can be a leader, and it is likely that leaders on Sway will go through a verification so that when you are aligning with, well, in this case, this is a real one, like Thomas Massey is on our platform. It is the real Thomas Massey. But how do you know that? I don't know. I guess you could audit it and see that Thomas Massey's Twitter page shared his Sway page. And so he would have had to have been hacked in multiple locations for that to happen. But anyway, so anyone can be a leader. And also, I come from a high school teaching background. So it's important to me that non-voters can also be leaders because, I had, 16, 17, 18-year-old students who had really poignant things to say about school policy, even if they weren't able to vote. So that matters immensely to us. As far as who can use it as a supporter. So right now, the most functionality gets unlocked if you are a registered voter. If you are an eligible voter and not yet registered, we're going to help you with that. That's really important to us to get you across the line in that way. If you are too young, you let us know and we will ding you on your birthday so that we can get you out to register. And if you are abroad or not a US voter, you can essentially tell us where you would be eligible to vote so that we know where our first international expansion should go. As far as issues that are on the platform, so we tend towards the like free speech, widest possible um, interpretation of what is political. Um, and yeah, so anything that you would be saying on Sway and like inviting people to join you, you will need to be authenticated and then share it on your own channels. And so if you are willing to say it with your full chest, as long as it is not violent, hateful, and I realize that those are terms that people grapple with, but the core of this is if you have a valid political idea, it should be on Sway. It is my hope that the most odious among them are very unpopular and that people are not interested in aligning with them. And we algorithmically do not boost any particular voting groups. Like that's not in our purview. And so we are not going to be the judge of what is, nice or right, like that. Those things are not for us. I think sometimes one of the easiest analogies is the app called Partiful. Partiful is a RSVP like party app. It's like it's your party. If you want to invite people and people are willing to come, great. But we're not going to be like, wow, that party looks great and that party looks great and that and basically flood guests to any one given party. And party is a fraught term here, but you mean I mean like the function, the event, as opposed to the political version. So in some, as long as you are, I think 13 or above, and have a political thought or a voting ideology that you would get other people excited about joining you, and you're going to make ballot recommendations, become a leader on Sway. And anyone can be a supporter, but we are trying to make a new form of civic currency that's backed by the civic action of voting. And so registered voters do have a different experience on Sway than unregistered voters.
Gotcha. Real quick, I want to go back towards the very beginning because I when I went on to Sway myself just to when I was trying to figure out what questions to make for this this podcast, I saw Thomas Massey's name on there. I was like, oh, well, hey, I mean, whether you like him or not, the fact that it's a sitting congressperson that's already using the app, that's got to be a big boost of confidence to say, hey, look, this is something that people want. And something you brought up in the last question as well, I meant to touch on as well. I thought that was interesting that you have the anonymity unless you really want people to know who you are, because especially today with how toxic politics is, it can be very hard to want to put yourself out there even if you really care about these things. So the fact that you can just still be involved in these endeavors, but you don't have to put your name out there. I mean, you could say, well, Discord lets you use a username or GroupMe or WhatsApp, but
our anonymous users can't post.
Oh, they can't post. Okay, but they can pay attention then. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That still makes sense because you don't want just a whole bunch of people just flooding the group with when they're not verified. But at the same, but it is still neat that people can at least still listen to or keep information about there without having to put their name to it. I mean, yeah, obviously you want a little bit more transparency, but at the same time, some people don't necessarily feel safe with that. So it is a nice
and I will say
there.
that in order for you to be a anonymous user that counts towards the verified voter count, you do need to go through and verify your voter registration. And, on some cadence, we check liveness, meaning that we will look at like you and your ID to make sure you're a real person and you are the person that you say you are. All of that data gets deleted immediately. So we only store a binary that you are the real person and you are registered. We don't store any PII. That's fraught. We do store, the geo ID for where you are registered to vote so that we can serve you up the right ballot. But lest people think that this is going to be some toxic cesspool. Like, no,
Right.
this is around, it's supposed to mimic the ballot box. Your vote is private, so is your support of these voting groups. Um, but it isn't a free for all. Like, you are a real person with a
Right.
real voter registration, which also brings up an interesting point, like on Twitter or, well, I guess X, or in some other spaces, there's potentially an incentive to voyeur and to just, watch what's happening. There is no incentive to voyeur here because you give credence towards the cause. So we do have a bookmark function if you are like interested in what's happening. But you should not join a group for something that you do not want to give leverage to.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And thank you for those clarifications. That's really good in case somebody at home was still a little on the fence about whether to use sway. And one last point before the next question. I thought that is really neat that you also do let non-voters use it as well. Now, obviously, yes, in order to actually make an impact, they have to be able to vote, but also you don't want to be too gatekeeping where this like, well, if
Yeah,
they're not voting, then we're just not going to have them in. Then they could potentially become voters. Who knows? Because they got involved in this sway group that really led them to, you know what? I am going to go and register to vote. And I am going to get a lot more civically engaged. You never know what's going to
exactly.
happen from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, you would love to sway to be used by a wide array of groups and campaigns. But are there any particular kinds of elections, not like a specific election that you want or a specific policy issue, but like general kinds of elections and policy issues that you had in mind that
Yeah.
you want sway to help generate civic engagement and education for, whether it's like a low turnout vote
Yeah. Yeah.
or more obscure issue?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I would say back in 2024, when I was working on the Harris campaign, like even the way I just said that is a misnomer. I was technically working for the coordinated campaign for PA Democrats. And I was doing that work out of my childhood bedroom. And in particular, was really a huge fan of our down ballot state rep. So that was the lowest race on the ballot that year. And this is, somebody who would impact the community that well, I guess my parents live in full time, but that I grew up in, that I care about immensely. And, uh, you know, the way that these were, people come into Canvas, they're getting these maps, like you're loading it up on minivan, you're sending them out with lit. I cannot tell you the number of times that I think we send people out with the wrong lit for their particular neighborhood, just because I would say campaigns aren't set up to give down ballot candidates the time of day. And so, in general, and state reps are still pretty big. Like there are really small races where the margins are tiny, and people opt out of them because they don't know enough. But somebody does know. Somebody in your community has like really done the work to know who would be the best for the things that you care about. So, as far as the things I am motivated to work on, I'm going to be so excited the first time, and hopefully this comes up in March, but the first time that some unexpected down ballot result happens because of coordinated action on SWAY. Um, and the other thing, when we're talking about issues that I get excited about, there are these widespread, very popular, nonpartisan issues, for example, cell phone free schools or childhood independence, that aren't part of the typical agenda, like capital A agenda for many politicians, but there's broad scale consensus. I realize that some people can quibble with the exact implementation of
Right.
these things, but I am really um, excited about the potential of those movements to utilize sway to show, essentially to use sway to aggregate and showcase the collective will behind these like really popular policies that sometimes fall through the cracks.
Nice. I do like these elections that are and policy issues that are not typically getting the time of day that there's the potential for them to have their time in the sun. You talk about these down ballot candidates, for example, and how often you see ballot drop off. For those of you who don't at home who don't know, ballot drop off just basically means the further down the ballot you go, typically speaking, the fewer voters participate in it. So they'll vote. A lot of people will vote on president and U.S. Senate and maybe U.S. House, but then you get to really local stuff. It's got to be a lot fewer people voting on that. But I do really appreciate it, especially because part of why these elections have these down ballot ones have so few voters is because it's a lot harder to find information,
Right.
even for you and me who are much more well versed in how to research elections. We're super
sure.
civically engaged, and if I try to bring it up, and in other cases too, when I talk about trying to solve the ballot information gap. If people like us are having trouble finding this information, how can we expect other people who are not as involved in politics but who want to vote, how can we expect them to be able to make an informed vote? So I can really appreciate that point that you made there too. And so you talked a little bit about it. You highlighted a little bit about hopefully not having people who are trying to incite people or inflame tensions, because my show here and then my work in general deals a lot with trying to mitigate polarization. So
Yeah.
how can sway be used to cut through the noise of polarization and try to bridge these political divides that we see today?
Yeah. Well, there are political science professors who could be multifold more articulate about this than I am. But I will say I'm always stunned when I look at uh, primary turnout, even in years like midterm elections or presidential elections, where there's the most excitement behind the potential race. You know, turnout hovers at roughly 20% for many of these primaries, which means that 80% of the potential electorate is opting out for some reason. And what happens when those 80% opt out? Well, you get the diehards, and the diehards tend to be on the polar ends of the spectrum because they're very motivated, because they have a very strong point of view. And there's so many historic examples of, incumbents who were outflanked on their left or right in these primaries. I think that most people are net more moderate and reasonable than we give them credit for. And that if we had more turnout and just a better mechanism to get people to the polls, uh, we would cut through a lot of the polarization just because, I mean, the average is the average for a reason, right? Now, Sway is not explicitly a GOTV tool, but I will say part of the reason that people don't go out is because it's inconvenient and it's overwhelming, and you don't feel drawn to any particular candidate or the system the system as a whole, right? And so um, one of the things that I'm hopeful for Sway is having people feel like a part of a group that is something bigger than themselves. So if I am, in the suburbs of Chicago and there are 1,000 of us who are all voting together on this local mayor's race, but also the congressional race, and the congressional margin was 15,000 and 1,000 of us like all checked in and we all voted, like I can see us as like working towards that margin. Like I can see the power of the group. And in much smaller races, 1,000 votes in some of these like down ballot mayor races like that, y'all are the kingmakers.
Yeah.
So um, it's very esoteric, one person, one vote. And if Sway can contribute to taking that concept and making it much more tangible and helping people see their collective power and what happens when the whole group shows up, and make it fun and social and, dare I say, easy to cast that ballot, I think that is the mechanism by which we get a more moderate electorate.
Gotcha. That's something I talked about several times in other episodes, including my 50th episode, is political apathy. And not necessarily because people just don't think it's important, but because they feel just disenchanted with the system and they don't want to participate because they feel like their voice is not going to be heard. And while a lot of those feelings are understandable, problem is when those kinds of people don't participate, the people who are participating are still the ones who are very easily polarized, who are already polarized, who have a super vested interest in and basically believe that they're battling evil and trying to stand up for good. And I mean, it's great to be passionate, but obviously, a lot of times it spills over into being a little too passionate. And that's something I'm very interested to see Sway hopefully be able to tackle a lot more, is this cutting through the polarization the ways that you talked about. And hopefully making it much easier for people to be more civically engaged, who are a little bit less given to these polarized feelings. But speaking of this more general overview of civic engagement, more generally, what do you think are 2 to 3 of the biggest roadblocks to civic engagement? I know you talked about it just a little bit, but maybe go a little bit more in depth. And how do you see Sway mitigating those obstacles specifically?
Yeah. Um, I think we design system. So the system is working as it intends to, right? We designed a system that makes engagement hard. uh, I was knocking thousands of doors in Pennsylvania in the fall of 24, and I can't tell you the number of times that I went to knock on a door and the garage door opened and it's parents piling their kids into the back of the car, and because it's soccer practice or whatever the case may be. Um, and they would look at me and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're voting for her." But you just people have life happening.
Mhm.
Like these are not groundbreaking ideas, but the fact that we don't have election day off, the fact that early voting windows fluctuate by state, the fact that in some states, I love this state. I lived in Texas for 5 years, but there are 3 elections in 90 days, right? Because you have the primary, the municipal, and then the runoff. Like these are just all barriers, not to mention the absolute overt ways in which people are being removed from the rolls, or I believe conversations around voter ID are misplaced, right? Um, anyway, there are so many barriers because we've designed it to be hard. So great, it's working as it intended. I'm just starting to learn more about the movements for mobile voting, the movements for just basically anything that makes the polls more convenient. I'm really fascinated into how that would work, and I think that there's a ton of potential. You know, um, I think people want the friction because they want people who are quote unquote informed. There's other ways that we could solve the information gap. Anyway, so that feels pretty big to me. And then I grew up in Pennsylvania, as we've well established. We do not have direct democracy. Out here in California, we do. And I will just tell you that direct democracy feels really off to me. We have these referenda where if you actually believe in something, you might need to vote yes on one, but no on the other because they're like, that is actually the same thing. Like, it should not take that level of literacy to be able to express yourself. I'm not sure that this is like the biggest thing, but I think it's indicative of the types of challenges. Like, we are not making the actual process of translating your values into representation easy. And you know, Sway aims to solve that by putting a trust layer between you and your representatives, meaning someone who's out there doing the work. You are saying, like, here you go. I'm going to add a little square to your superhero quilt. Go off and do this work for me. That's not problematic to me at all because there are people who are out there, many of whom should have big platforms, but are screaming into the void. Like, let's connect people with the people who are doing this work, who are trying to make it easy, who are trying to share the values of their communities back to representatives, because that whole communication chain thus far doesn't feel optimized.
Right. The point you had at the beginning is something that I think a lot of us who are more involved in politics don't appreciate enough, and it's just how people who are not as involved in politics, they have all these other things going on. When I was younger, and some people who have watched this podcast for a while have heard me bring it up before, but what I used to be very much of the opinion that, oh, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain, kind of thing. And over time, I came to be a little bit or a lot more understanding of that. Now, some people, yeah, just want to complain just to hear themselves complain, or they're just being lazy. But there are some people who just they they're just overwhelmed with all these other demands of life that they feel like they can't devote enough time to politics to maybe even make an informed choice. So they feel like it's best for them to stay out, for example. And it can
Yeah.
be very hard for those of us who are involved in politics for a living and say like, oh, why aren't you voting? What, do you not care? And it's just these people have got plenty of things on their plate too. They have
Yeah.
their work is in something completely different. And like you said, if they have kids, they got to bring them to maybe a practice, got to bring them to school. They have all these other things going on in their lives that can make it very difficult to engage. So I do really appreciate you bringing up that point. Is I mean, it seems like it's an easy thing to engage with when we're
Oh no.
involved in
Oh
politics, but
no.
it's really not easy to be civically engaged. It's really not.
Yeah, no, the number of people who where my office was in Pittsburgh when I was working on the campaign was adjacent to a rehabilitation facility for people who had been in accidents or what. So, just people who were needing support just to get through the daily motions. And then also a blood bank, which, great. Okay. So it's us in this little like medical facility. And so the number of walk ins who needed help submitting their voter registration online, which was not a trivial process because it
Yeah.
required a signature and the upload wasn't like there were just all these things that I kept on having this out of body experience being like, it should not be this hard, or it shouldn't take me utilizing Canva to remove the background of like these things are problematic. And yeah, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, obviously. But I like to say that the most democracy, quote unquote, if that's a verb, I did was the week after the election. So you get these cure lists, and obviously at that point we knew that Harris had lost, but there were still questions about whether or not Senator Bob Casey was going to be able to hold on to his seat. And so we were aggressively trying to cure all these ballots. And I got a cure list. So curing is the process by which you prove that the person who cast the ballot was the person that they say they are. Or, maybe there wasn't a signature match or something happened. And I got a cure list for a historically Black portion of the city. And uh, just the littlest things, apostrophes and names, like using your maiden name, which happens, I think, anywhere. Like, anyway, there were so many things that, and these people, every single person who I helped out was like, oh my God, how would I have known if like you didn't come to my door that my ballot wasn't cast? And I don't know, it just like left me feeling like it was kind of a setup.
The signature thing is an important point to bring up too. It's something I've mentioned on the podcast a couple times. But when I was one time when I was working for a candidate, I had to get petition signatures to get them on the ballot because we were just trying to go through the petition signature process
Right.
instead of doing the paying the fee, the filing fee. And I just remember it being stressed to me as is like, hey, whatever number that you've got to get, like I think it was like 900 something. Got to try to get 10% more than that because for whatever reason, invariably there will
Yes.
be signatures rejected for no apparent reason. They could be people who are registered to vote. And they might be registered in your jurisdiction, but they just have some sort of slightly different way that they wrote their signature from what's on file, and then all of a sudden the signature is declared invalid.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
and
mean,
let me just also say,
yeah,
before people come at us like, this is the reason there should be ID, but like not a single person who I went to on this cure list was the wrong person, right? It's
yeah,
just these like nitpicks on uh the minutia. Anyway, once again, there are people who are infinitely smarter on these topics, but I just want to point out that so many people who engaged and tried to engage in the process were still theoretically shut out. And you get like enough of those and it starts to contribute to this like, why bother?
yeah. Well, it's a good point you made about too. Is some people might have a knee jerk reaction to what we're talking about. I don't put my opinion on specific policy issues, and so voter ID is going to be the same thing. I'm not going to say whether I support voter ID or not, but there is that issue where sometimes people who, and they are the person who is the person that they say they are, they just have something that just like a little bit different that you think would be innocuous, and it does get flagged as not
Right.
that person. So whether you support voter ID or not is beside the point. It is something that happens, and it is something that does need to be fixed in some way. And now, obviously, that's an easy thing to say is, oh, this thing's got to be fixed. I don't know how exactly you fix it. I'm not going to pretend I do. But I want to go back to something you had mentioned a little bit. Or I'm going to sort of paraphrase what you said. You can tell me
I'm
if it's
excited for
accurate.
this.
Yeah, you can tell me if it's accurate or not. But basically, Sway is a completed product, but of course you're always building on top of it. So in a lot of ways, a lot of these political endeavors, they're never completely finished.
Oh,
You're
yes.
always trying to make them better. So of course, Sway is meant to be a long-term vision, just like many political endeavors are. So where do you envision Sway in the future, like 2, 5, 10 years down the road?
It's a great question. So 2 years down the road is the presidential, and I would like to see Sway be part of a meaningful bump in turnout in the presidential in 2028. As far as 5-10 years down the road, so big picture, like zooming out, I think this is the most audacious thing I will say, and I recognize it, and welcome to Silicon Valley hubris. But the greatest issues of our time do not care about country borders, whether it be AI regulation, climate change, etc. Like these things are global issues, and we need to find a way to be able to coordinate humanity's actions. Right now, our best attempt at coordinating at a global scale is the UN, and it is feckless. People can choose not to engage. There's no teeth. And honestly, I trust humanity more than I trust humanity's representatives in a body that hasn't been given the tools to enforce any sort of collective rule. So if Sway is successful, it will become the global governance graph by which we are able to organize and move humanity as like against things that are existential threats. So yeah, now that I've said that audacious thing, I see international expansion. Elections work differently in various countries. I'm also very excited about the potential for a tool like Sway in places where elections don't occur, or maybe where speech isn't free. Ultimately, the problem that we think we are solving is this aggregation and showcase of collective will. And if you believe in both the individual and humanity, then you have a vested interest in making sure that the opinions of the individual and the collective are registered in a way that you can take action on them.
I know you meant it sarcastically, but I don't see that as hubris. I think that, maybe it's a lofty goal, but I think it's a reasonable thing to strive for.
Well, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, no, these are very important issues that we do have to recognize. Like you said, these are things that are becoming more and more global now. It's not necessarily to say that, oh, every single country has to abide by the same issues, that they can't have some sort of self-governance, but it is something that at least we have to be unified in realizing, okay, if we don't do something about this, this is going to be a very serious problem for all of us. So we at least need to, even if you don't come up with a coordinated plan, you at least need to discuss it so we can at least be able to try to at least have as much information as we possibly can. So I can totally respect that goal. Maybe it's a little lofty, but hey, sometimes the biggest things that happen in history are because somebody had a lofty goal and they achieved it. So we'll see about that 5-10 years down the road. But the 2 years part with the more engagement in the presidential election, obviously I hope to see that as well. And so this next question I bring up is primarily because of a post you made on LinkedIn that I really liked, but I want to give you your chance to talk about it in your own words. And you also hinted at it a little bit a couple times in this interview. But basically, you were talking about some skepticism that you've had from people, even though you're one of the co-founders of Sway. You're not the person, but you're one of the co-founders. You're one of the faces of it. Some people have seen that the fact that you're involved in, you have a history in democratic politics, that some people might look and Sway and say, oh, is this really going to be impartial? Or are they really going to let my thoughts be said if I'm not the quote unquote correct brand of Democrat, or if I'm a Republican or independent? And you push back basically by assuring the impartiality of Sway. So in your own words, can you elaborate on that? And what would you say to people who have similar suspicions about sway?
Sure. Well, I want to give myself a little bit of grace here by just saying, like, it, you don't get into building civic or political tech if you're not a political animal, right? Like, if I was just wholly disinterested, that would be kind of weird as well.
That's also true.
um, but yes, I have been in and around democratic politics since I was a very young child, and my values align with Democrats more, and those are my values, and they have nothing to do with sway. And the reason I can say that confidently is, uh, well, one, we're designing sway to be pipes, like pipes through which political influence flow, and we are not looking to tilt the pipes one way or another. The water will flow as it does. But then there's also these thoughtful decisions that are hard coded. So, for example, we will never be like, "Hey, Paul, you like X issue? How about Y?" Like
Yeah.
that is an
Yeah.
inherently political action.
Right.
Um, the the spread of sway will be done primarily through the people who are creating voting groups. So that means that you are already hearing from these people on other platforms that don't make the same promise to you. Um, but yeah, I mean, sway is not a point also of dialogue. We don't need another political X. Like, we have that first one.
Yeah.
So this is really more of like the handshake point between a leader and their supporters, where it's the exchange of information for leverage. But yeah, I mean, across the board, it's not just my judgment. Uh it's not, you know, incumbent on only me. I think there are ways in which, like, one, algorithmically, and we intend to open source this. Like, here you go. This is like how this is built, and this is why we are not elevating one thing over another. Um, it's a marketplace of ideas, really. So I hope like the most like popular things actually win. Like, that would be good for democracy. And then as far as, who is the arbiter of good, bad, etc. Well, I guess good and bad can both be on the platform, but like evil maybe.
Yeah.
So we have a vision for a community notes model, but we also have a vision for like a deliberation board, for what stays and what goes. But realistically, most things will stay because most things are valid, and that's the that's the gift of living in this version of democracy. Um, yeah, as far as skeptics, I mean, I think most of the skepticism is from a really good place, and I understand it. And I would understand it also more if you hadn't been on the platform and you're like, what gets elevated? And I mean, the answer is like, we don't elevate anything artificially. Who can use this? Like, anyone, but like, this is transparently how we create our score. And uh more and more, it's incumbent on us to prove our neutrality to our users. And so anything that we can do to create that transparency via, whether it be audit logs, whether it be if a page gets, like a voting group page gets updated, all the members get an alert like, hey, I signed up for this and it was, you know, anti-climate change, and that person got paid off by big oil. Like, wait, what? Like, we want to be able to create pathways for visibility, but light is a great disinfectant, and uh all of these things are happening right now in the shadows. Like, let me just be very clear. I think having a more direct route to who is making endorsements to you and why is going to net benefit the system. But yeah, and we'll continue to be clear as to who our funders are. We are a for-profit public benefit corp, so every voter is our stakeholder. So we need to make decisions that are aligned with the goodness of the stakeholder. So that's you. um, but I welcome the questions. I welcome the skepticism. Hold me to a high bar.
I think that's a good attitude to have. It's that it goes back to this. There's a fine line between healthy skepticism and flat out distrust, and something I try to talk about a lot, not just on here, but whether I'm writing on LinkedIn or elsewhere. Is you shouldn't just automatically entrust something that you see, especially with today's political climate. But you need to at least be able to be open and say, like, okay, this is what Claire says Sway is about. I'll go check it out, instead of like, no, you know what, no, because she has X politics, so I don't believe this is what Sway is doing. There's a
Yeah.
clear difference in how that is, and it's obviously you should hold companies or organizations accountable, but sometimes
Please
people
do.
think, yeah, but sometimes people think what they're, that they're holding somebody accountable, and in reality, it's just they're just letting their politics talk for them. And we all have our biases we're contending with, and sometimes we have might be more distrusting of something than we should be. It happens to all of us, but hopefully we're all a lot more self-aware about that going forward, myself included. So we are running a little bit low on time. So just one more question about our topic, and then get to the random question of the day. So more generally, not just for anyone who wants to use Sway,
Yes.
just in general, what are 2 to 3 practical pieces of advice you'd give to anybody who's trying to improve civic engagement in politics?
I would say diversify your content intake. I think it's worth seeing multiple sides of the spectrum. Say touch grass and talk to real people.
Yeah.
I'm very close with all my neighbors, and yeah, I think if more people stepped outside, obviously a privilege in many places that doesn't feel safe, but
Right.
um, if you have the ability to be in community with people, and particularly people for whom they see the world a bit differently, go do that. It's like a way better way than just projecting. And um, I love me some Reddit. I love me some I don't do Discord or anything, but like um, I would say in general, I find those spaces to be not entirely reflective of the reality that I have when I just go outside and talk to people.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and then I think get to know yourself and what you value and why you value it. I think a lot of my formative political development was actually in the classroom. As a classroom teacher, I got to see policies up close and personal and really determine what for me felt like non-negotiables, whereas things that felt um, a a bit looser, I guess, like things that were like, okay, I can see the other side, but I hesitate to use the word like militant or whatever, but there are things that
Right.
I'm like, oh my God, like, no, this is, this has to be true for me to be like excited or support someone. So anyway, the core of this is learning, I think. Stay curious.
Yeah, nobody has 100% of the answers, even though some people like to think they have 100% of the answers.
Yeah, I
Uh,
definitely don't.
yeah, that's me either. But yeah, I mean, I think all of us, we tend to think we know a little bit more than we actually do. But then for some people, it's just they think that they've got the world figured out, and it's always good to reevaluate the things that you believe or that you understand to be true, to say, well, is it really as true as I thought it was? And maybe with all the information you had at one point, it did seem like it was the most true thing, and now maybe it's not. I mean, that's
Yeah.
science in general has developed like that for hundreds of years. But yeah, it is always good to reevaluate all the to constantly reevaluate what you take in, and whether it agrees with you or not.
Yeah.
So I so thank you so much for all of your insights on civic engagement. So now, real quick, before we get you out of here, for those of you who might be new to the podcast, every guest episode I do a random question of the day at the end, just a fun, random, non-political question, or if it is political, it's not really about specific political views, just to flesh things out and give people a different side of the guest. So, Claire, for
Yes.
you, today's random question of the day is: what is your favorite state in the U.S.? And you can't pick your home state or one that you've lived in for a long time. And why is that your favorite state?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I'm going to take now Pennsylvania, which is definitely my favorite, Texas
Yeah.
and California off the map because those things are all places I've lived. Um, I have affinity for the desert. So I think Arizona is undeniably gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a nerd about it, but I really love going on like desert botanical tours whenever I'm there because it's a
Okay.
nice it's this weird intersection of ecology, which I studied biology in college. I love that
Okay.
sort of thing. And then also you learn about a lot of like native uses of the plants. I don't know. I'm like a really huge dork for uh, desert botanical tours. So I'm going to go with Arizona. It's just so different too. But I ran track and cross country in college, and I've basically been to every state.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah, I'm at 46 out of 50. So, yeah, and I've done multiple cross country drives. They're all so pretty. But we'll go with Arizona. We'll go with Arizona.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, there is something very fascinating about the desert states. I have a few family members over in Arizona, but I haven't been there since like 2001, 2002. It's
Like
been
you're
it's
due.
been
You're
quite some
due.
time. Yeah, I am due, and I actually just had not just had, it was a while ago. I had a guest on here. She was from, or she is in New Mexico, and that's a state that's always fascinated me too. But
Right.
for me, I would go with Virginia because I have a lot of
For lookers.
family. I have a lot of family on my mom's side that lives there, and so I've visited there many a time. And then obviously just the involvement it's had in American history, particularly really early on in American history. You know,
Yeah.
how many of the founding fathers were from there, and my personal favorite founding father, James Madison, also from that area. And just
Wait, I
there's
need to
still
get a
so much of it I
personal
haven't
favorite
seen yet.
founding father.
What's that?
I need to get a personal favorite founding father. That's going to be my homework from this.
Well, hey, there you go. I mean, obviously, there's, like most of the founding fathers, also some very noticeable flaws that you have to account for too. But just his involvement in creating the Constitution, and he's really not given a lot of enough credit for the fact that he was the first president to really be the leader of the country when we had a legit war going on with the War of 1812. I mean, you had
Yeah.
some foreign policy skirmishes, for lack of a better term, with other presidents, but that was the first real war that
Hmm.
America had been sent in since the Revolution, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it. And just the amount of contributions he's made to political thought is just, I just find really fascinating. Again, not everything that I personally agree with, but
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
I
Good.
find him very fascinating. But yeah, Virginia, and there's still so much of Virginia that I have uh, yet to see, and there's just so much there. It's a huge state.
Yeah.
I mean I live in Florida, so that's a huge state too. Uh, but yeah, Virginia would be the next one up. But obviously, there's I have gone to, I want to say like maybe 32, 35-ish states, but I haven't really visited all of them either. I've just gone through them. So need to rectify that. Also, a special shout out to South Dakota. South Dakota's got a lot of great stuff too. And I've only gotten to go there once, but my grandpa was, my mom's dad was born there. And obviously got
It's one
Mount
of my four.
Rushmore.
I need to go.
Yeah. Mount Rushmore obviously is great. Crazy Horse Monument is great. Badlands National Park is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. It is
Okay.
absolutely incredible, especially if you go there at sunset. So for you, Claire, for whenever you go to South Dakota, or for any of you who go to South Dakota, so special shout out to them. But that is going to wrap things up for today's podcast. Oh, actually, real quick, obviously I'll link Sway in the show notes, but any other links that you want me to put for this episode?
No, just go to sway.co. If you even had 10 people join a voting group, like that's huge. 10 votes is enough to really start to impact particularly local races. So don't think that you have to be some big creator or have some massive mailing list. If it's just you and your neighbors, or you and your family, or you and the people you meet at the dog park all working towards something, you start to have some real power and leverage. And then obviously, as voting groups grow on Sway, you also be able to find things that hopefully align with your views and start to populate your ballot with recommendations that feel personal and powerful.
Great closing point. So I will, of course, put Sway in the show notes. For my show notes, we'll run through real quick my 5-day educational email course about how we can more effectively mitigate polarization. You can sign up for that. My Facebook, Paul Rader, author and speaker, my LinkedIn, my Medium.com profile, my email, paulraderwrites@gmail.com, and my website, paulrader.org. And I think that was all the links. But please like, comment, and subscribe, and share the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So that is going to wrap things up for today. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.